They told me not to share this, said it was classified, that what happened up there was just another failed expedition, another group that cracked under the weight of the cold. But that's not the truth. What happened at Station Polaris wasn't an accident. It wasn't madness or isolation or the dark playing tricks on our minds. It was something else. Something that shouldn't have been found. Something that was never meant to wake up. The files were supposed to be erased, the reports buried. But I've kept one recording. One final account of what we saw and what's still out there beneath the ice. If you're listening to this, promise me one thing. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think is calling to you, don't open the door. I never wanted to go back to the Arctic. Not after what happened at Station Polaris. I'm not sure why I'm even recording this. Maybe part of me still hopes someone will believe me. Maybe I just need to hear my own voice say the words to make sure it all really happened. We were a small team. Me, Eliza the biologist, and Mark, our comms specialist. The three of us were sent to investigate a communication blackout from Polaris, an isolated research outpost buried deep in the Arctic Circle. No one had heard from the researchers there in weeks. They said it was probably just a storm, a power failure, something technical. They were wrong. I still remember the sound of the snow beneath our boots. It wasn't the soft kind that crunches gently. It was sharp, like glass, breaking under each step. The wind screamed through the open expanse, carving through our thermal suits. The world around us was colorless, white-gray, and the deep, endless blue of the horizon that never seemed to end. I kept telling myself it was just another assignment, just another mission. But even then, something felt wrong. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like the air itself was holding its breath. We saw the station long before we reached it. A dark geometric silhouette rising from the frozen ground. The kind of structure that didn't belong to nature. Its solar panels glinted weakly under the pale sun. The wind turbines creaked as they turned. Everything about it looked perfectly intact. No damage, no collapse, no sign of a storm. Mark muttered, "Looks operational." But the silence that surrounded it said otherwise. When we reached the main airlock, I pressed my gloved hand against the metal. It was warm. Somehow impossibly warm. The generators were still running. The lights inside were faint but steady. We entered, and the door sealed shut behind us with a hiss. Inside it was pristine. The floors gleamed. The lights buzzed quietly overhead. Supplies were stacked neatly in the pantry. The heaters hummed softly, and a pot of coffee sat cold but full on the counter. It looked like the crew had just stepped out for a walk. But the air felt heavy, like the building itself was suffocating. We split up to search the place. Every corridor looked the same, metallic, sterile, empty. I checked the living quarters first. Beds perfectly made, personal belongings untouched. A book left open on a nightstand. A photo taped to the wall, 5 researchers smiling in front of the same station we were now standing in. I didn't realize it then, but every single one of those faces would haunt me later. Eliza's voice crackled over the radio. "Read, Mark. I found something." Her tone was wrong, quiet, trembling. We followed her voice to the far end of the facility. She was standing in front of a heavy steel door, the kind used to seal off the secure labs. A red light glowed above the keypad. Locked from the inside, Mark frowned. "That's not standard protocol." It took us an hour to cut through the lock. The metal glowed orange under the plasma torch. When the door finally swung open, a stale wave of air rolled out thick with something that wasn't rot, but old fear. There were 4 bodies inside. They were huddled in the corners, slumped against the walls, faces twisted in frozen terror. The kind of terror that doesn't come from pain, it comes from knowing. Their fingernails were broken. The walls were scratched, gouged down to the metal. And on the inside of the door, written in something dark and dried, were 2 words: "Don't open." Eliza covered her mouth. Mark cursed under his breath. I just stood there staring. Their hands were torn and bloody, not from fighting something, but from clawing at the door, trying to get out, or trying to keep something from getting in. The food stores were untouched. The air recyclers were running perfectly. The cause of death, later confirmed, was dehydration and starvation. They'd locked themselves inside and never came out. I remember whispering, "Why would they do that?" Eliza's voice cracked as she said, "Maybe they thought something was out there." Mark said nothing. He was staring at the message on the door, his flashlight trembling just slightly. We didn't speak much after that. We just worked, or at least we tried to. But every sound in that station, the hum of the lights, the groan of the metal, even our own breathing started to sound wrong, like the air itself was listening. We stayed that first night in the station. None of us said it out loud, but none of us wanted to leave. The wind outside was screaming the kind that bends steel and buries the world in white. Inside, it was warm, almost too warm. The heaters buzzed steadily, as if nothing had gone wrong here at all. That's what unsettled me most, the normalcy. I kept expecting to see someone turn a corner, someone alive, walking toward me with a tired smile. But every corridor was empty. Every shadow stayed still. Mark took over the communications bay, trying to bring the satellite link online. Eliza went through the research logs. I checked the generators and found them humming flawlessly, as if someone had just serviced them. Everything functioned perfectly, except for the people. By morning, the quiet had become unbearable. It wasn't silence. It was something heavier, denser, like the whole building was listening. Mark looked exhausted when I joined him at the comms console. "All systems are fine," he muttered. "Power transmission lines, antenna array. But the logs show someone manually shut down the connection 2 weeks ago." "Why would they cut themselves off?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the static flickering across the monitor. In the cafeteria, Eliza was reading through a stack of printed reports. "The environmental data's all normal," she said, her voice flat. "But there's something weird, look." She turned the papers toward me. The graphs showed rhythmic fluctuations in air pressure, repeating every few hours. "Like a pulse?" "Seismic?" I asked. She shook her head. "No tectonic activity for hundreds of miles. It's like the air itself was vibrating." I didn't want to think about what that meant. We ate in silence. The sound of our chewing was too loud. I could hear the hum of the lights, the faint whistle of air through the vents, and beneath it all, something else. Something like a whisper, right below the edge of hearing. That night, I woke to the sound of knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Then nothing. I held my breath, waiting for it to happen again. The wind was still raging outside, rattling the walls, but this sound had come from inside, from the corridor just beyond my door. I opened it. The hallway stretched ahead, dim, metallic, silent. My flashlight beam caught nothing but dust motes in the air. "Read," a voice whispered behind me. I turned so fast, I nearly dropped the light. No one was there. In the morning, I asked Eliza if she'd been walking around at night. She shook her head, her face pale. No, she said quietly. But I heard something too. What? She hesitated. Someone crying. Later, Mark mentioned hearing the static in his headset again. Only this time, he swore he heard words in it. A voice buried in the noise. What did it say? I asked. He just looked at me and said, "It said my name." From that point on, everything began to change. The walls seemed to hum when no machinery was running. The lights flickered, even though power levels stayed stable. The air smelled faintly metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. And every time I looked down the long main corridor, I had the terrible feeling that something was standing just around the corner, waiting for me to see it. On the third day, Eliza found scratches on the outside of the main door. Not deep gouges like the ones in the lab, just faint marks, almost like fingertips, dragging down the metal. When she showed them to us, no one said anything. Mark tried to laugh it off. Probably windborne debris, he said. But there was no wind strong enough to leave those marks without scouring the rest of the wall. That night, the knocking came back, louder, from different walls, sometimes near, sometimes far. Mark finally snapped and shouted at the noise, his voice echoing through the station. "What do you want from us?" There was no reply, but the knocking stopped for a while. When it started again, it came from the vents. By the fourth day, none of us was sleeping. The station had gone from feeling empty to feeling crowded, like the air was too thick, as if we were sharing it with something unseen. Every sound made us flinch. Every silence lasted too long. Mark spent most of his time in the comms room headphones, clamped over his ears, trying to isolate the signal he swore he'd heard. Eliza had become quiet and jumpy. She'd stare at the walls like she was listening to them breathe. I tried to keep busy, anything to distract myself from the knocking. It came every night now, sometimes soft and rhythmic, sometimes violent enough to shake the walls, always moving floor to ceiling, left to right, sometimes near my head as I lay awake, pretending not to hear. That morning, Eliza told me she'd had a dream. She said she saw the dead researchers, the ones in the lab. But they weren't screaming. They were whispering to her, whispering from behind the door. I told her it was just stress. I didn't believe myself. Later, Mark called us to the comms room. "You need to hear this," he said, pale and sweating. He played the recording. Static filled the room, the same hiss we'd been hearing since we arrived. But then came a faint tapping underneath it. A pattern. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 more. "Someone's broadcasting this," Mark whispered. "It's coming from inside the station." That's when I noticed his hands were shaking. Eliza frowned. "You're saying it's transmitting from here?" He nodded. "From the secure lab. The one with the bodies." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eliza said, "That's impossible. We shut down all internal systems in that section." Mark just stared at the waveform on the monitor. "Then tell me why it's still sending." We went to the lab together. None of us wanted to, but none of us could stand not knowing. The door we'd cut through had been reinforced again by us days ago out of fear. We'd bolted it shut, sealed it with metal plates. Now the sound was coming from behind it, a slow dragging scrape like nails on steel. "Eliza," I whispered, "you hear that?" She nodded, her face white. Mark stepped closer. "Maybe there's a loose ventilation duct behind the wall. Sound could be bouncing around." Then came the knock. Once, twice, a pause, then 3 times harder. The same pattern from the transmission. Mark stumbled back, eyes wide. No, no, no. Eliza pressed her hand against the door. It's coming from inside. Don't, I said, grabbing her wrist. But she didn't move. Her expression went strange, calm, almost serene. They're alive, she whispered. They were trying to warn us. I pulled her hand away and stepped between her and the door. Eliza, look at me. We saw them. They're gone. She blinked and tears welled in her eyes. Then who's knocking? The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. A silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. Then faintly through the stillness came a voice. Not over the radio, not through the walls, inside my head. It was soft rasping, almost familiar. Don't open the door. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at Eliza. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. Did you hear that? She shook her head, whispering, hear what I didn't answer. We backed away from the lab, one slow step at a time. Mark sealed it again, bolting the plates tight until his knuckles bled. None of us spoke for the rest of the night, but I couldn't sleep. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words scrawled in blood across the inside of the door. And I wondered if they'd written them to warn us, or to warn whatever was inside not to come out. I used to think I understood fear, the kind that makes your pulse quicken, your hands shake your breath, catch in your throat. But that's not real fear. Real fear is quieter. It seeps into you slowly, like frost through glass, until you can't tell where it ends and where you begin. After the knocking, something changed inside the station. It wasn't anything we could measure. The lights still worked, the power readings were steady, and the temperature held constant, but the air felt heavier. The shadows seemed to move when we weren't looking. The silence, God. The silence had a weight to it. I started hearing things in the static hum of the generators. Not voices exactly, more like fragments of thought, echoes that didn't belong to me. Mark spent hours replaying recordings from the comms array, trying to trace the source of that strange signal. He said it didn't behave like a transmission at all. It pulsed in short bursts, irregular but rhythmic, as if the signal itself were alive. Eliza wouldn't go near the lab again. She barely spoke. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the door that led to that section of the station, her lips moving silently, like she was answering someone I couldn't hear. I wanted to believe it was all just stress, cabin fever, but one night, while checking the storage room, I found something that made that impossible. It was a handprint on the inside of one of the sealed windows. It was small, pale, smeared downward, as though someone had pressed their hand against the glass from outside and dragged it down. But there were no footprints in the snow beyond it. No sign anyone had been out there. When I called Mark to see, he tried to rationalize it. Condensation, he said, voice unsteady. Refraction, optical illusion, something like that. But I saw his face when he leaned in closer. He didn't believe himself either. That night, the power flickered, just once, long enough to plunge the station into complete darkness. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. And in those 3 seconds, I swear I heard breathing right beside my ear. When the lights came back, the room was empty. Eliza had started keeping notes in her field journal again, but she hid it whenever we approached. I caught a glimpse once, scribbles numbers, and strange diagrams. Circles intersecting with lines that didn't make sense. What are you working on? I asked her. She smiled faintly. It didn't reach her eyes. They were studying sound, she said. Frequencies, patterns. Maybe they heard something they shouldn't have. That's when she showed me the data logs she'd found on the main terminal, readings of atmospheric vibration. Each spike came at exact intervals, too perfect to be random. And they were growing stronger closer together. It's not the wind, she whispered. It's not mechanical. It's something else. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. The vibrations got worse. Every few minutes, the walls would hum softly at first, then louder until our teeth ached. The sound wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside us. Mark tried running diagnostics, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. This can't be right, he muttered. The frequency it's coming from below the station. He paused, staring at the readout. No, wait. Not below. From inside the foundation. We followed the readings down to the lower maintenance bay. The metal floor was freezing under our boots. The humming grew louder as we descended until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Then it stopped. The silence hit so hard, my ears rang. I looked at the others, Mark's face pale, Eliza clutching her coat. There was a hatch in the center of the floor, sealed with a thick metal plate. It hadn't been on the station's original schematics. Someone had added it later. What's down there? Eliza asked. Mark shook his head. Nothing. It's supposed to be solid ice. But it wasn't. The plate was warm. We stood there in silence, the three of us, staring down at that metal hatch. The air felt charged, like standing beneath a storm that never came. I don't know how long we stayed there before Mark finally whispered, "We should leave it alone." We went back upstairs. None of us mentioned the hatch again. But I noticed how, as we climbed the stairs, the hum started again, so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. And when I glanced back one last time, I could swear I saw the plate shift. Just slightly. As if something underneath had exhaled. The vibration stopped the next morning. The silence that replaced them felt worse. I remember waking up and realizing that for the first time in days, the air wasn't humming. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt exposed, like something was watching, waiting for me to notice it was gone. Eliza insisted we keep investigating the readings. She said she'd found something buried in the station's old storage logs, something tagged only as specimen 9A. The entry was weeks old, dated just before the first crew went silent. The coordinates pointed to the maintenance bay right above that sealed hatch. We went down there together. The hum was faint again, so faint I thought maybe it was just my heartbeat. The hatch was half buried, under frost edges, rusted from years of neglect. It took us nearly an hour to unbolt it. When we finally pried it open, a sharp gust of air escaped, warm, stale, and wrong. Inside was a narrow chamber, barely large enough for one person to climb into. A metal container sat in the center, covered in frost. No lights, no cables, just the box. Mark muttered, "Jesus, what the hell is this?" Eliza knelt down beside it, helped me lift it. We hauled it onto the floor. The lid was sealed with locking clamps. She scraped away the frost, her breath fogging in the dim light, and whispered, "It's been down here a long time." The clamps came loose one by one, each release echoing through the bay like a gunshot. When she pulled the lid open, I saw it a crystal, roughly the size of a grapefruit, resting in a nest of metallic dust. It wasn't smooth or clear. It shimmered faintly, fractured inside, like a prism full of shifting shadows. Light didn't reflect off it. It bent around it. Mark crouched closer. "Is that quartz?" "No," Eliza said. "It's not anything I've ever seen." Her voice trembled, not from cold, from awe. I don't know why I reached out. Curiosity, maybe. or maybe something else. It felt like the crystal wanted me to. The moment my fingers brushed it, pain shot up my arm, a sharp electric pulse that froze me in place. For an instant, I felt something alive inside that object, like a heartbeat pressed against mine. Then it stopped. Eliza's voice broke through the haze. "Read. What happened?" I pulled my hand back. The skin on my fingertips was white like frostbite, but there was no pain. I stared at the crystal. It looked ordinary again, inert, harmless, but the humming had changed. It wasn't in the walls anymore. It was in my head. We brought the object upstairs to the main lab, despite every instinct telling me not to. Eliza wanted to analyze it, run tests. Mark argued, said we should lock it back where we found it. They fought until Eliza snapped, shouting that it was the reason we're here. She was right. The last crew must have found it first, and whatever it was, it hadn't let them leave. When the power flickered again that night, the glow came from the crystal, faint like embers inside dark glass. Eliza stayed up studying it. I couldn't watch. Every time I looked at it, the air seemed to thicken. The shadows in the corners grew deeper. I kept thinking I heard someone whisper my name so close, it brushed my ear. But when I turned, there was no one there. Around midnight, Mark found me pacing the hall. He looked pale, exhausted. "I think the signal's coming from it," he said quietly. The same pattern. 3 knocks, 2, then 3 again. "It's not interference, it's transmitting. Transmitting what I asked." He shook his head. "I don't think it's sending. I think it's calling." We went back to the lab. Eliza was sitting at the desk, staring into the crystal's surface. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. "Eliza," I said. No response. Mark reached toward her. The moment his hand touched her shoulder, she gasped like she'd been underwater. "I saw them," she whispered. "The others, they're still here." Her eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the crystal's faint light. "They're inside it." Mark and I didn't know what to say. He reached to cover the crystal with a towel, but the moment he did, the lights across the station dimmed. The heaters shut off. Every system blinked once, twice, and then steadied again. The hum returned, louder. We stood there in the flickering light, the 3 of us staring at that thing. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound, but in the silence, I felt something press against my thoughts. Not a voice, not words, just a presence. It was aware of us. Eliza whispered, "We should never have opened that box." She was right, but it was too late. By then, I think the station already belonged to it. The first whisper came that night. I was sitting alone in my bunk, staring at the frost crawling across the window. The power had been flickering for hours, dimming the lights in slow rhythmic intervals, like the station itself was breathing. I'd started to count the seconds between each flicker when I heard it. A voice, soft, close, right next to my ear. It said my name. I turned so fast my neck cracked. No one was there. The corridor beyond my door was dark, silent still. I told myself it was the wind or fatigue, or maybe the hum of the generators playing tricks on my hearing. But then I heard it again. Whispered, urgent, "Read." I got up and stumbled into the hallway, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The beam caught nothing but walls and frost, but the whisper didn't stop, it moved. Always behind me, never ahead. By the time I reached the main control room, my pulse was hammering in my ears. Mark was there, hunched over the console, static crackling through his headset. "Mark," I said, voice trembling, "did you just..." He cut me off with a wave. Listen. He held the headset toward me. Beneath the static, something pulsed, soft, rhythmic, almost human. Then just barely audible words. Not alone. I pulled the headset off. What the hell is that? He looked at me with wide, sleepless eyes. It's on every frequency, every single one. I can't block it out anymore. Eliza appeared in the doorway. She looked even worse than Mark. Her eyes bloodshot, her lips pale. You hear it too? She said quietly. It wasn't a question. None of us slept after that. The whispers came and went, like the tide fading, when the lights were bright, returning whenever the station dimmed. They never shouted, never screamed, just murmured low and steady, threading through the silence. Eliza tried to record them. Each time she played the tapes back, there was nothing but static. Still, she swore she heard her own voice, whispering from the playback, saying things she didn't remember saying. Mark stopped talking entirely. He sat in the comms room for hours staring at the screen, muttering numbers under his breath, like he was trying to decode something. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "They're speaking in patterns. If I can find the rhythm, maybe I can answer them." I told him he sounded insane. He didn't look up. Maybe that's what they want us to think. By the second night, the whispers had started to take form. They weren't just words anymore. They were voices we recognized. Eliza heard her brother. I heard my father's voice. Mark said he heard a woman he used to know. Each voice said the same thing, open the door. We stopped using the radios after that. We couldn't tell what was real anymore. At one point, I walked into the storage room and found Eliza standing in the dark facing the wall. Her hand was pressed flat against the metal. I could hear faint noises from the other side, a scraping, a slow, deliberate drag. "Eliza," I said. She didn't move. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Her voice was calm, distant. "It's talking to me." "What is—" She turned then, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes. Not fear, not madness, recognition. "They said they can help us," she whispered. "They said we're already part of it." I pulled her away, and she fought me, screaming, kicking, until she realized where she was. When she finally stopped, she began to cry. "I don't remember walking in here," she said. Neither of us mentioned it again. Mark's condition worsened. He refused to leave the comms bay, saying the whispers grew louder when he wasn't near the signal. Sometimes I'd hear him talking quietly, as if having a conversation. One night, I went in to check on him. He didn't notice me at first. "Mark," I said softly. He didn't move. The monitor glowed pale green across his face. Then, without turning, he said, "They told me what happened to the others." I froze. "What did they say?" He turned then, eyes hollow, lips trembling. "They didn't die here, Reed. They're still here." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I couldn't, because at that moment, I heard them too. Behind the walls, beneath the floor, faint voices rising in unison, whispering our names. It's strange the way fear can change shape. At first, it was sharp, a flash of panic that made my heart race, made me alert. But after a while, it dulled into something heavier, something that sank into my bones and refused to leave. By the fifth night, the whispers weren't just sounds anymore. They were inside us. We couldn't tell if we were hearing them or thinking them. Mark stopped sleeping entirely. He looked hollow, his cheeks sunken, his eyes ringed in dark bruises. I'd find him sitting at the console, staring into static that wasn't playing anymore. Once I caught him whispering to it. Not nonsense. Names. Mine, Eliza's. The names of the dead researchers. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled faintly and said, "They said the storm is coming." There was no storm. The sky outside was calm, endless white, but the air inside the station felt electric, like we were living inside a thundercloud. Eliza had stopped eating. She stayed in the lab, scribbling frantic notes in her journal, connecting meaningless numbers and symbols. When I asked if she was okay, she said something I'll never forget. "They're not voices, Reed. They're frequencies. We're hearing the station's signal. It's changing us." Her voice cracked on the last word. That night, the knocking came back louder than ever before. It didn't echo through the corridors this time. It came from everywhere. From the floor, the ceiling, the air ducts, even from the inside of the walls. We gathered in the common area, huddled together like children. The sound was so close, it rattled the cups on the counter. Mark gripped a flashlight like a weapon. "It's testing us," he said through his teeth. "It's looking for a way in." I wanted to tell him to stop talking like that, but when the banging moved to the outer door, the same door we'd sealed days ago, my voice failed me. Eliza whimpered, "It's here." I wanted to believe it was the wind, but the knocks were too deliberate. 3 slow strikes, pause, 2 more. The same pattern we'd heard in the transmission. Mark moved toward the door. "Don't," I hissed. "We don't know what it is." He didn't listen. He pressed his ear to the metal. I'll never forget the look on his face when he turned back to us. It was blank, empty. "It's not outside," he said softly. "It's in the walls." The banging stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic vibration that shook the lights overhead. Somewhere deep in the structure, something was moving, slow, crawling, dragging. Eliza screamed and clamped her hands over her ears. "Make it stop." I grabbed her shoulders, trying to hold her still. "There's nothing there." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. We barricaded every door we could find, piling chairs, tables, whatever we had. Every rational part of my mind knew we were trapping ourselves inside, just like the last crew. But it didn't matter. We were past reason now. The sounds grew worse with each passing hour. Scratching, tapping, thumping. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps pacing in the hallway just outside our sight. Other times, the air would vibrate with a low hum so deep it made my teeth ache. Then came the voice. It spoke from the vents, quiet at first, then louder, until it filled every corner of the station. It was our voices, all 3 of us, overlapping, whispering the same phrase. "Let it in." Mark snapped. He grabbed a metal rod from the tool rack and started hitting the walls, screaming at the sound. "You can't have us. Do you hear me?" The voice only grew louder. Eliza collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I tried to pull Mark away, but he swung the rod wildly, almost hitting me. When he finally stopped panting, his knuckles bleeding, the voice fell silent. For the first time in hours, there was no sound at all. Then, from the other side of the main door, came 3 slow knocks. Mark's breathing quickened. "It wants the artifact," he said. "It's calling for it." Eliza's eyes went wide. "How do you know that he didn't answer?" He just started walking toward the lab. I grabbed his arm. "Mark, stop. We don't know what it is." He turned to me, his face trembling with rage and terror. "We can't keep pretending, Reed. You know what's happening. That thing wants us. The longer we stay here, the worse it gets." Eliza screamed for him to stop, but he shoved past us. He stormed into the lab and stood over the crystal chest, heaving. The moment he touched it, the lights went out. For a second, the world was pure black. No sound, no air. Then came the whisper, soft and clear, echoing through the darkness. Open the door. When the lights returned, Mark was standing completely still, staring down at the artifact. Eliza, he said in a voice that wasn't his. It's beautiful. She ran to him, pulling his hand away, but it was too late. The crystal glowed again, brighter this time, pulsing like a living heart. We fled the lab and sealed it shut behind us. The light seeped through the cracks in the door, flickering like fire. And for the rest of that night, the knocking didn't stop. It never came from one place. It was everywhere, all at once. When I finally closed my eyes, I swear, I heard something whisper, not in my ear, not even in my mind, but somewhere behind me. It said, "One left." And when I opened my eyes, Mark's bunk was empty. Mark was gone for almost 6 hours before we found him. The station was silent the whole time. No whispers, no knocking, not even the hum of the machines. It was as if the place was holding its breath. When we finally found him, he was sitting in the comms room, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling the artifact, glowing faintly on the desk in front of him. He didn't look at us when we came in. He just kept whispering over and over, like a prayer he didn't understand. "They're not trying to hurt us," he said quietly. "They're showing us." Eliza backed away immediately, showing us what Mark finally looked up. His pupils were wide, his lips cracked and pale. "What's underneath?" he said. "What was here before the ice?" I told him to stop talking nonsense, but my voice sounded small, weak. Because deep down, I wanted to believe he was wrong, and I wasn't sure he was. He pointed at the monitors. "It's all connected. The vibrations, the voices, the signal. It's not random. It's communication," Eliza snapped. "They killed the last team, Mark. You think that's communication?" Mark smiled faintly. "Maybe they didn't die. Maybe they changed." We argued for hours. Every word echoed too loudly in that metal room. None of us wanted to admit what we were really thinking, that whatever was happening wasn't just physical. It was inside us. At some point, Mark stopped answering us. He just stared at the artifact, whispering under his breath. I thought he was losing his mind, but then I saw it too. The crystal was pulsing again, not randomly, steadily. Thump, pause, thump, thump, a heartbeat. "Eliza," I said, "do you see that?" She nodded slowly, her face pale in the faint light. "It's syncing with him," and it was. Each time Mark's pulse beat in his neck, the crystal brightened. Each rise and fall perfectly matched. He reached out and touched it again. "Don't," I started, but it was too late. The moment his fingers met the surface, every light in the station flared white. A sharp hum filled the air, high-pitched and painful, drilling straight into our skulls. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, but it didn't help. It wasn't sound anymore. It was inside my head. And in that sound, there were voices, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, whispering, screaming, pleading. I couldn't make out words, only emotion, fear, hunger, longing. Then just as suddenly, it stopped. Mark was lying on the floor. His nose was bleeding, his eyes open, but unfocused. Eliza knelt beside him, shaking his shoulder. Mark, wake up." He blinked slowly. Then, in a voice that wasn't his, he whispered, "It's awake." We dragged him to his bunk, though I don't know why. It wasn't sleep that came over him. It was something deeper, emptier. His breathing was shallow, his lips moving, as if he was still whispering to something we couldn't hear. Eliza turned to me, shaking. "We have to destroy it." I wanted to agree. But the moment she said it, the lights flickered again, and I felt that pressure behind my eyes, the same one I'd felt when I touched it before. It won't let us, I said. That night, I dreamed I was standing outside the station. The snow stretched in every direction, endless and silent. But under the ice, I could see shapes, moving massive shifting shadows that breathed in rhythm with the wind. When I woke, the crystal was glowing through the wall, its light spilling across the floor like water. Mark was gone again. His bunk was empty. We found him an hour later, kneeling by the sealed hatch in the lower bay, hands pressed against the metal. The hum was back stronger than ever. I understand now, he said, without looking at us. It's not trying to come in. It's trying to go home. Eliza grabbed his arm. You're not opening that hatch. He turned his head slightly, and I saw tears streaking down his face. It's not ours to keep. When we dragged him away, he didn't fight. He just looked at me with a hollow smile and whispered, You hear it too, don't you? The pattern. And I did. It was faint, hidden beneath the mechanical hum of the station, but it was there. A slow, steady pulse, echoing through the metal floors, vibrating up my spine. Thump, pause, thump, thump, a heartbeat. That night, as I lay awake, the whispers came again, clearer now, more familiar. They didn't sound like strangers anymore. They sounded like us. And they were saying one thing over and over. It's inside. I don't know when I stopped believing we could leave. Maybe it was after Mark's second disappearance. Or maybe it was the moment I realized I'd started hearing my own voice, whispering from the dark. By then, none of us were the same. Eliza's hands trembled constantly. She had scratches up her arms from where she said she'd tried to pull the sound out. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Pale skin, cracked lips, eyes bloodshot and hollow. Mark wandered the corridors like a ghost, talking to the walls in a language that wasn't words. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence and tilt his head, as if listening to something none of us could hear. The station had stopped feeling like shelter. It felt like a body, and we were trapped inside it. Every few hours, the lights dimmed. Every time they did, the whispers came back stronger. They weren't pleading anymore. They were chanting, repeating one phrase that echoed through every room. Open the door. I tried to block it out, but it wasn't just sound anymore. It was thought spreading through me like a fever. I'd find myself standing near the main airlock without remembering how I got there. My hand would hover over the controls, frozen my heart, pounding in my throat. Eliza started locking herself in the med bay. She said the whispers were lying, that they wanted to trick us into letting it out. But she never could explain what it was. None of us could. The knocking returned on the 7th day, slow, measured. Each strike heavy enough to rattle the walls. Mark said, It's not outside. Eliza screamed at him to shut up. You don't know that. He looked at her with this awful calm. I do. Because I can feel it. Every time you breathe, it moves with you. It's in here. That's when I realized the air felt wrong, thicker, heavier, like the whole station was filled with invisible water, pressing in from all sides. The artifact pulsed again, brighter than ever. A steady crimson heartbeat that painted the walls in trembling light. Every pulse matched the knocking. Eliza backed away from it, her voice breaking. We have to destroy it. Now. Mark laughed, quiet, hoarse. You can't destroy what's already inside you. Before either of us could stop him, he grabbed the artifact. The instant his hands closed around it, the metal floor beneath us groaned. The sound was deafening, like the entire structure was crying out. Eliza lunged toward him, but I held her back. The crystal's light was flooding the room, now now swirling with shapes' faces, maybe pressed against the inside of the glass, screaming without sound. Then it shattered. Not violently, no explosion, no shards. It simply unraveled, the light spilling upward like smoke until it filled the room and vanished through the vents. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Mark collapsed, twitching blood seeping from his nose and ears. His eyes darted wildly before fixing on me. "You have to let it out," he whispered. "It's suffocating here. It wants the cold." Then he stopped breathing. Eliza fell to her knees beside him, sobbing. I didn't move, because the moment he died, the knocking stopped. And then the quiet began to breathe. It's hard to describe. The silence became alive, vibrating softly around us, as if the air itself was exhaling. For a moment, I thought it was relief, that whatever it was had left. But then the pressure returned stronger than before, pressing against my chest, crawling into my ears. That's when I understood. The door wasn't meant to keep something out. It was keeping us in. "Eliza," I said, "we have to open it." She stared at me like I'd gone insane. "No, that's what it wants." I nodded. "Exactly." She shook her head, backing away. "If you open that door, it'll kill us." I looked at Mark's body. If we stay, it already has. I don't remember making the choice. 1 second I was standing in the hallway. The next, I was at the control panel, my hand hovering over the manual release. Eliza screamed, "Reed, don't." I pressed the button. The locks disengaged with a slow metallic groan. The door shuddered, its seals breaking a rush of freezing air, tearing through the corridor. I braced myself for what I thought would come through some shape, some horror waiting to devour us. But there was nothing, only the endless white of the Arctic. The whispers vanished, the humming stopped. For the first time in days, I could hear the wind again. I stepped outside. The cold bit into my skin sharp and clean. Eliza followed, clutching her coat, sobbing. Behind us, the station stood silent, and still, the door wide open. There were no monsters, no movement, just the sound of the wind howling through empty halls. For a brief, impossible moment, I thought maybe we'd beaten it, that whatever haunted that place had died with Mark. But then I looked down. The snow around the station was smooth, except for the footprints. Dozens of them circling the building. Human footprints, half buried, leading nowhere. Eliza whispered, "How long do you think they've been there?" I didn't answer, because as I watched, the wind passed over them, and they didn't fade. They deepened, like something beneath the snow was still moving. 2 days passed before the rescue team arrived, or at least that's what they told me. Time had stopped meaning anything by then. I remember the roar of the helicopter, the crunch of boots on ice, the muffled voices through thick masks. They found me sitting outside the open station door, staring at the horizon. Eliza was beside me, motionless, her breath shallow, and even like she was asleep. I don't remember speaking. I don't remember climbing aboard. I only remember the sound of the wind fading behind us, replaced by the mechanical hum of the rotors, and the realization that for the first time in days, I couldn't hear the whispers. They said the station was empty when they went back. No sign of Mark, no sign of the artifact, just an open hatch in the maintenance bay, sealed from the inside. They asked me what had happened. I told them the truth, or at least I tried to. About the vibrations, the whispers, the artifact. About how it made us see things, hear things, feel things. They didn't believe me. They never do. They called it isolation-induced psychosis, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning, maybe radiation exposure. They said it could explain the hallucinations, but not the data logs, not the patterns in the air pressure, not the human fingerprints found on the inside of the sealed hatch prints that didn't match any of us. Eliza was transferred to a private facility. They said she was stable but unresponsive. When I went to see her, she was sitting by the window, staring out at a snow-covered field. She didn't react when I entered, didn't blink when I said her name. Then softly she whispered, "Do you hear it too?" I didn't answer, because I did. A faint hum so low it almost felt like a heartbeat thrumming beneath the floor. The doctor said it was tinnitus. But when I left the building, the sound followed me outside. Weeks passed. I tried to write my report. Every time I started, the words felt wrong, like I was remembering someone else's story. The events blurred what was real, what wasn't. Some nights, I wake up gasping, convinced I'm still there, that I never left Polaris. Mark's body was never recovered. The official record lists him as missing, presumed dead. But I know he didn't die there. Not really. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I see him standing outside the station, face pale and frozen, mouthing words I can't hear. The artifact. We never found it again. They said maybe it sank into the ice, lost forever. I wanted to believe that. But a few days after the rescue, I received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a small frozen piece of metal, blackened and fractured. Attached to it was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. It said only 2 words. "It's awake." I burned the note, threw the metal into the sea, but the noise never stopped. Every night since I've heard it, soft at first, then louder. Sometimes it's in the walls, sometimes in the static between radio channels, and sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear Eliza's voice calling from the other side of the wind. "Reed," she says, "don't close the door." I try not to listen. I tell myself, it's just memory, just trauma, just ghosts in my head. But then the air around me starts to hum again, steady and slow, like breathing beneath the ice. I think about what Mark said before he died, that it wanted the cold, that it wasn't trying to get in, but to go home. And sometimes, when the world outside my window goes completely still, when the wind dies and the lights flicker, I wonder if maybe it's found a new way to travel. Through the static, through the silence, through us. So if you ever hear a faint knocking in the middle of the night, 3 slow beats, a pause, then 2 more, don't open the door. Please, don't open it. They said the Arctic swallowed Station Polaris years ago, that the ice closed over it like a wound sealing away everything inside. But sometimes, when the wind shifts, you can still hear it. A faint hum beneath the static of radio channels, a heartbeat buried deep in the cold. I try not to think about it anymore. I tell myself, it's gone, buried, forgotten. And yet, some nights, the air around me grows still. The lights flicker. And from somewhere far away, or maybe just behind the walls, I hear the same sound again. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 2 more. They always say it's just the house settling, just the pipes, just the wind. But if you ever hear it too, promise me you'll remember what I told you. Don't open the door.